Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome. We are so glad to have you here at the Writer's Bridge. Absolutely fantastic to see you. We have an amazing guest today who we are super excited to talk about a whole new way of looking at getting your writing into the world, getting a publishing credential. We're going to talk about chapbooks. What are they? Why would you write one? And how can it feed all of your writing work? But first, if you saw our bonus episode last Thursday and boy, it's like, wow, wasn't Writer's Bridge just like the other day? If you want to see it again, we talked about expat stuff, or if you missed it and you would like to watch the replay, it is on YouTube. And at YouTube, there is also a link to the chat and a link to a free PDF of questions to ask yourself if you're considering moving abroad from one of our wonderful community members. While you're at YouTube, and I think this is obligatory, that I like it's legally required for me to say it, please like and subscribe so that you get all of our episodes notified when they drop for you. Hey, Sharla, before we dive in, what's coming up with Craft Talks webinars?
Yeah, do you want to mute and then unmute real quick?
Oh, yeah, let me do that. Let me do the mute all thing. Excellent. Where'd the participant button go? Sharla, you got to find the participant button for me. Oh, there it is. Mute all. There we go. And Darien, you'll need to unmute yourself again when the time is
You
right.
do that just in time, I think. All right, so I'm excited to share with you at the heart of both of our upcoming events actually is fast drafting. So we have tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, a special 2-hour webinar with Flash Draft Your Book using dramatic structure to know where you are going and how to get there. That's led by Allison, who obviously is with us today. And then we're also kicking off a 6-week workshop with Darien Shu Ji, who is also joining us today. And she's going to guide through a 6-week workshop, fast drafting a micro memoir chapbook. So Allison, aside from tomorrow's webinar, that's at 1 p.m. and not 3 p.m. like we usually host them, what else do you have coming up?
Well, I am all about the instant gratification. So I am so excited because we'll do some teaching and some writing and some live editing tomorrow so that we can see how all this structure is actually working in practice. I'm also super excited. You all have heard me talk about the craft and publishing voyage on the Queen Mary 2. We have also added a return voyage from New York to London, which is just 10 writers with me and literary agent Amy Collins for small group and one-on-one work. Let me know in the chat if you want to hear more about that, and I will send you the link. Hey, Sharla, who is our amazing guest?
I'm excited to introduce Darien Shu Ji, who is an international best-selling author with Penguin Random House and the Mark Twain Distinguished Writer in Residence at the University of Connecticut. Her work spans multiple genres, from novels translated into 11 languages to award-winning microprose and poetry collections. She's the
Sorry, I'm
executive.
trying to hit the mute button there. Pause for 1 second. And hey, anybody who is here who is not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself. I think there's a couple of people that I might actually have to boot them over to the waiting room because the mute button is not working. Okay.
All right.
All right. Leah, I'm going to pop you into the waiting room. When you come back, try and mute yourself. Okay, Sharla, as you were.
Darien is the executive editor of Non-White and Woman 131 Micro Essays on Being in the World, and the author of Writing the Hawaii Memoir. Books has won the IPPY Awards, the Poetry Society of American Chapbook Fellowship Award. She teaches creative nonfiction at UCLA Extension and Hugo House, and often with us at Craft Talks, and offers specialized micro prose workshops through her teaching platform, Writer-ish. Welcome, Darien. So glad to have you finally on Writer's Bridge.
Yay. And folks, as we go, we will take some questions from the chat. We're going to use the red question mark icon to find those so that we can find them. So please don't use the red question mark icon yourself, but do give a thumbs up or a heart to questions you really want to hear the answers to. So Darien, it's all about chapbooks. That's the class you've got coming up as well. What is a chapbook? Is it a collection? Is it a unit? Is a novella a chapbook? I mean, mean, like the bell jar is pretty short. Is Sylvia Plath a chapbook? What
Right.
makes it a chapbook?
Well, there are probably different definitions with different people. And generally, when we talk about chapbooks, traditionally it's always been poetry chapbooks, right? So a chapbook essentially is a very slim volume of work. Again, it's traditionally always been poetry, but I'm doing the prose chapbook. And it's usually something that back in the day, because we don't do it so much anymore, they were stitched by hand. They were made by hand. So there's almost never a spine, mostly because there's just not enough work. And so it could be anything from like 3 pieces. It could be anything maybe up to like 20 pieces. When it starts to get to that number where it's thick enough that it's, say, like if it was to be published, it might need a spine, it's actually, we're moving into the collection category. So I would say this is very generally speaking for a poetry chapbook, anywhere from, say, as if you were doing it on your own, 6 poems, but traditionally it might go up to 18 or 24 poems, right? Again, depends on how long your poems are, that sort of thing. Then once you get like to the 24, 36 and up range, you're really talking about a poetry collection. So I'm really looking at, when I talk about prose chapbooks, I'm speaking not just about the size of the chapbook. It's not about whether it's 20 pages or 35 pages. It's about how, in my sort of opinion, how the work is contained within the page. So, I teach microprose a lot, which I define as 300 words or less, which works to be about 1 page, 8.5 by 11, if it was like 1.5 space. But on a chapbook, which tends to be smaller, here's an example of a chapbook. This is a poetry chapbook by Poetry Society of America. And then just put it up to like a regular novel, you can kind of see the difference. I don't know how you can see it.
Hold it on end for us. Hold it on end so that we can see like the shelving spine. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. This, yeah, and this, and then Charla's got some up too, right? I mean, you rarely see a chapbook. Yeah, you rarely see a chapbook in a bookstore because they can't shelve them. They might have them at, cool indie bookstores might have them in a basket, something like that. They're usually not very expensive. They're like anywhere from like, $3 to $10, something like that. But with prose chapbooks, which I'm really excited about, I feel like people can tell their stories, especially using micro or any kind of short form. That lends itself to the smaller nature of the booklet. So if you really had something that was like the bell jar, which is, actually kind of big, that definitely would have a spine, even if it was in smaller format. Those things are more like, I don't know, you could call it like a novella, or you would even call it maybe even a memoir. But it wouldn't necessarily be a chapbook. So a chapbook really has to do, before, again, you'll see them now and they're stapled, but before people used to stitch them by hand. Some people still do that, so they make the covers by hand. It's the whole experience. So it's the words, it's the presentation, it's just how people get to experience this sort of like art form that's put together. But for prose and for poetry, but for prose, I'm looking specifically for, can a piece fit on 1 page or 2 pages, so that like a poetry chapbook, the reader gets to experience whatever it is that they're encountering, and then when they turn the page, it's something new. So we are generally talking about something short, but the truth is, as you all know, because you're all writers, you can do whatever you want. It just has to work. That's always what I tell my friends and colleagues who are writers, who are like, can I do this? I'm not sure about this form. And I'm like, as long as it works, you can do whatever you want. So, you can kind of make the chapbook form your own, but, following it strictly, which I kind of do, I just usually say prose pieces, 300 words or less, that actually still fits on a page, single spaced, and about 18 pieces.
Okay, so I'm very familiar with poetry chapbooks. I have a poetry chapbook. I was looking for it. I don't know where it's at. And I read a lot of poetry chapbooks, but you're talking about prose. So what genres are suitable for chapbooks? Is there a market for genres besides poetry? And then also a question from the chat is, what's the difference between a chapbook and a zine?
And a zine, well, a zine's really small. A zine traditionally is something that would be, when you normally see a zine, it's an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that's folded right into 6 frames into a little
And
booklet.
a goth girl with a lot of eyeliner has stapled it together in her bedroom after laboriously stealing photocopies from school because she was supposed to be in detention, but they left the copier unguarded.
That sounds very, very
Need,
specific.
zines need zine needs a copy machine en masse for sure. And if anyone's at AWP, I will have 4 zine creators with little zines at my table to show you how to write small. But that's really small. that's literally a 6-panel with a cover and a back cover of how you can fit your story in. So you could do that, but that's really small. A prose chapbook is I don't want to say it's more elevated, but it is more of a literary manuscript. It's just in a smaller form. And so, again, we're talking about, let's just say maybe 18 prose pieces to 24 prose pieces. And it can be fiction. I'm going to, Charlotte, I'm sure we can share the Black Lawrence Press code and link, but there's a lot of indie presses that do chapbooks, and you can kind of see how they put it out in the world. To answer your question about, where's the market for it, I'm going to be honest, it's not a huge market, mostly because booksellers can't fit them on the shelves, right? There's just not that. So a place like AWP or like any kind of a fair or any indie bookstore, especially a poetry bookstore, they will love and favor a chapbook. But also chapbooks are really great as gifts. So if you end up doing it as, I say, writing stories that are micro memoirs about your family or about your own experience, and you put it in this form, you can also do it with food. You could do it with recipes. I mean, so it'd be like, a food narrative and then like a small recipe. You can get really creative with it. But the idea is that you're trying to tell a story within these pages, right? So if you are able to do that, they can also be vignettes, but there's some overarching theme that's holding your chapbook together, which means you can have multiple chapbooks and you can tell multiple stories. So it works. I work primarily with creative nonfiction, even though I'm published as a novelist. But this is a form that I teach with most of my personal essay, micro essay, and CNF classes in general, memoir especially, but really it works with any form.
I love that. I love that. So who is reading chapbooks? Like you're telling us they go to the indie publisher bookstore. How much do you sell your chapbook yourself from people who are like, "Oh, I love Darien. I'm going to go to your website. I'm going to click through." How
Right.
much do people where do people find out about them?
Right. So honestly, you encounter a chapbook, which I know sounds like, well, how's that going to happen? It's like encountering it in the wild. So again, there are publishers that publish chapbooks. So Poetry Society of America published my chapbook, which was a prose poetry chapbook, which, just so you know, this is all definition, right? So a lot of those pieces I had previously published as CNF, as micro narratives. A couple pieces were published as short fiction, flash fiction, all under 300 words. Actually, they're all under 250 words. So it's kind of a definition thing. They, for example, do a limited print run of 500. And like mine sold out. It came out, I think, in 2021. They usually sell out. I mean, usually they will do a print run, they sell out. A lot of the people who do them by hand and maybe use a letterpress will maybe even do a limited print run of 25. So a lot of it is, yeah, how are you getting the word out? Are you connecting with booksellers? If you've put together a really good chapbook manuscript and you've figured out maybe some artistry around it too, right? It's not just like a regular white plain cover and everything, and you approach it an indie bookseller, they'll probably buy a couple copies and give you a chance to be in the basket. But then, yeah, somebody has to flip through the basket and encounter it and experience it, unless you're at a place like AWP where literally there are booths of books and chapbooks. But it is a close encounter sort of moment. So I'm not going to kid you about that. But again, this is how you're experiencing form, whether or not this is one more piece that you can get sort of in your literary kind of like cap of experience. There are a lot of publishers who do like seeing chapbook collections out in the world because it gives them a sense for knowing how to cohere a project. What is the thread that ties it all together? And it's honestly, for those of you who've never read a chapbook, they're so much fun to read. They're just so delightful. I mean, I go to AWP and I will tend to buy more chapbooks than I will buy books because I know I won't be able to see them really that easily anywhere else. And I live on an island in Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific and very few chapbooks out here.
Yeah, and I have my chapbook at the bookstore down the street from me because I have a relationship with the bookstore owner. So it's not that they don't always carry them, but it's not usual because they sometimes don't have ISBN numbers. And yes, it's hard when they don't have spines. They have to have
That's a good
special.
point. So chapbooks don't have an ISBN. They are not actually ever in like the Kellogg. Like it's like unless you're doing a self-pub thing on KDP for Amazon, you can't really get you won't Ingram Spark or do anything on your own. You could, okay, I shouldn't you could, but it's generally not done. The majority, like I would say 95% of chapbooks, other than ones that are sold through a publisher that does that, they don't have ISBNs. I mean, they're so small. They are like, this one has a spine, but this is really actually quite thick. I think it's quite thick for a chapbook. But, you know, if you, but this is a mix of poetry. So a lot of the line breaks are long. But sometimes they're really small. Like, you can't tell, but like, here's my face, but really small, right? And again, it depends on the publisher and how they want to present. I mean, the wonderful thing about a chapbook is it's fun. It gives you an opportunity to engage with the words and the work and the presentation in a way that honestly you can't do with a collection or a larger manuscript. I mean, authors want to. They're like, I have ideas. Oh, is that Rick's?
This is by Michael Zuloff, and I like that. I don't know if you can see it, that it's like very long, and so the poems have a interesting thing they do on this page, and there's like a, you can see a little bit of a cricket or something on this on the side.
I have one like that. Rick Barrett, who was the director of my MFA program, I got my MFA at 50. He had one that's very similar to that. Was it, is it Albion Press? I'm not sure. And that he does all letterpress for those chapbooks, and they're hand stitched. So there's like, you know, a thread in the spine. And then this is mine. So again, super thin. Like that's Michael Day putting it. And then here's a larger one that somebody did. She self-published this. And this is actually, oh, I guess I should have taught this in my last class. This is actually, see, if you look inside, the pieces are fairly short. Some are actually really short, but I'm just flipping to the wrong pages. But see, each of these have their own page. And essentially that's, it's not, there's no hard, fast rule, but that's essentially what you're looking at, is something that gives you also a certain amount of white space. We're not looking to cram the whole page. That's why I'm saying it's different from like bell jar or a small novella. You know, that's just a small format. But a chapbook specifically is trying to achieve something with a certain amount of white space. It's as much about the artistry as it is about the words. I mean, you know, I'm a writer like you all, so I'm going to be like, the words rule, but the white space matters. You know, the experience of reading the work matters.
So I have a story at Creative Nonfiction. We did, I know some of you might be familiar with this. We had a very small publication called True Story, which was like a chapbook. It was one long form, and it looks like this.
Darien says she has all of them.
All of them.
You have all, you collect them all? Yeah,
I
and
have,
so,
I'll go run and grab them in a second so everyone
but
can see.
it's one long story, one long essay, and one of them actually has it's been optioned to be a movie. So that's a really big success story. It was the very first one, and I can't remember the name of it now.
It's not Leo in Venice, is it?
No, my favorite
bicycle with the bicycle on the cover.
No, it's about musicians in Washington, and I'll look it up, and so I can put the title in it. But yes, and I'm sorry that they ended too. My favorite one was Dirge for the Doubly Dead, which was a historical research essay that was about ghosts. I loved it, and a murder and a mystery. But all to say, there is an appetite for them, and they do lead to success. So do you have any notable chapbooks that have helped people's careers advance, or do you want to talk about your own career and how you started with chapbooks?
Here's the advantage to a chapbook. Okay, so I don't think anyone's going to be like, you know, that for poets, a chapbook is a really good stepping stone into a collection, especially if you're having the chapbook. If it's like, if it won a chapbook award, there's a lot of chapbook contests. And then, you know, if you're with chapbook publisher, you know, it helps a lot if you're trying to, you know, get a bigger collection out in the world. Prose chapbooks are relatively new. Again, you know, it's like you would need somebody who's going to, you know, be a home for a place like, for a collection like that, and really kind of develop it. But what's great about it is, in general, it's going to be your best work or some of your best work. And again, you're going to kind of bundle it together. So thematically, there's something that's holding it together. And when you do that, you'll be able to, you know, so it's a previously published credit, but it's also an opportunity for you to kind of see how your work works in the world, how it looks on the page, and it gives other people a chance to see that as well. And you can, of course, PDF it too, you know, it's not the same experience at all, but this is the digital world. We don't live next door to each other all the time. So it's easy to also send something like that out as a work sample, a complete work sample, and people won't feel like, oh, I'm going to spend the next, 3 weeks reading this. I mean, they're going to get through it in like pretty quick, in an hour or less, and they'll get a really good sense of you and your writing. And so even if you're not thinking about writing short or doing short prose in that way, it might still be, I mean, I'm a fan of short prose, and I think that it can help us no matter where we are in our writing journey. It might be a great way to develop some sort of publication creds for yourself, both individual pieces or a whole chapbook. If you haven't published the individual pieces at all, or any individual pieces, I would say to try to get a couple pieces published first and then go for a whole chapbook. But you know what? Also, you might be a project-oriented person and being like, okay, if I know I'm going to put this chapbook together, I'm going to like funnel my energies towards it, and I'm going to be working from that perspective. And that could actually motivate you, right? To
So
work.
I think that
Yeah.
that kind of ties into a question we've got in the chat from Catherine, which
Okay.
is, if I create a chapbook, can I submit the individual pieces to literary journals or put them in a longer
Yes.
memoir using the pieces? And I'll add to that, does it matter what order it's in? Like if it's already in a chapbook, can I then put it somewhere else? Does it depend on whether I published it or whether somebody else published it? Darien, please tell us that there are some like definite rules that can bound our literary practice and help us
I know.
feel
Just
secure.
tell us how to make it work. Yeah. Okay. No. So there is, I would say, I would recommend a certain order of operations, so to speak, but you can, of course, do it in different ways. So the order of operations would be you write an individual piece, or actually 3 to 5 individual pieces that might work well together. You submit those, you get those published. So you have at least a couple of pieces in your future chapbook that have already been in a lit journal somewhere. And don't be like, I have to get into the New Yorker, which they don't do really prose pieces like this, but I mean, just like find a good home for a couple of these pieces where you have a really good shot of getting them out in the world. Once you have that, then I would say chapbook. Once you have chapbook, then you go into collection. Now, every publisher, if you end up working with a publisher, will have some criteria about how much of a previous chapbook or collection can be in a new piece of work. So I have 36 micro narratives or prose poems in this collection. And I think mine is, I think they said 30%, 35%. So if I wanted to republish this entire collection, which I would love to, because there's actually well, we'll talk about it later. I would love to, but I can't. Or I shouldn't say I can't, I just have to ask permission. So that's another thing to consider too. Not the do it and ask forgiveness, then ask permission. The literary world's a little different like that. So you're going to want to, be really thoughtful with your partners who said yes to you and be like, I would love to republish this as an X or as part of my larger collection. Would that be all right? And they might say yes or no. Because honestly, well, Poetry Society of America is a little different, but I was going to say that because this was a limited print run, and some publishers have limited print runs and some don't. The ones with the limited print run, I'm like, really? Are we like not going, are we going to wait for this to be like $800? I mean, there's nothing gained for them by saying don't republish it, because it doesn't take away, unless people think, oh, if I just wait 6 years, the poet or the author will just publish it in their own collection and I can just wait for that. I mean, it is a financial decision, but it's trying to hold some literary integrity together. So the order would be try to publish a piece, then create a chapbook, then take it anywhere else you want to go. Include it in your memoir, as a short piece. You can mix and match a lot of hybrid options. Also the same with just if you wanted just a larger collection. That's the ideal mode, so that people can see sort of the track record. You were vetted here, then here, then here, but you're not doing too many pieces, etc. But this is a windy path. It's like we never know which way it's going to go. So if you end up doing this collection, I have reverse published things before, where sometimes a literary journal will say, oh, if you have a previously published work, maybe you have an indie, something you published on your own, and there's a piece in there and you submit it there. Short Reads sometimes does that. They'll say, we'll take a previously published piece, and you could do that and then reverse get into a literary journal, even though it wasn't originally in your literary journal, but it was in like your collection. That's rare, but it's out there. So just know that everything's possible. But I think the way that I kind of told you that flow is good. And the other thing that's good about testing the waters and sending out your micros, or your small pieces that would go together, is it gives you a sense for how people are looking at the work, where you need to refine. I'm sure for those of you who've submitted before, you know how that is. You send submit and you go, oh, I should have changed that one thing. Right after you've paid your $3 and submitted out and put it out in the world. That's the thing too. The thing that's nice too about when you write in a short form, like a prose chapbook, like if you do the micro memoirs or any kind of short micro essay, is you're not just going to submit one to a literary journal. It's a lot like poetry where you can submit 3 to 5 pieces. And I always tell my students, look at pieces that speak to each other so that they're almost like a triptych, or there's like, they can there's like 2 or 4 pieces. I've had lit journals that have taken like 6 pieces. One of them took 12 because they were in sets of 4 and they just took all of them. And so when you submit a piece, you can either do I want them to see the breadth of everything I can do. So all the pieces are really different, but they don't work together. That's one approach. The other approach is the pieces work together. They all are on the subject of your mother. They're all on the subject of loss. They're all on the subject of an orange, right?
Yeah.
And then they can be like, oh, you know what? We thank you for submitting your 5. We really like these 2. Could we take these 2?
Right. So you write them, you submit to be published, and then you build a chapbook. How do you get your chapbook published? Like, what's the steps there?
So there's 2 things. Well, okay, there's a couple of avenues. The first is you self-publish it. And that means also you get to have fun because you get to see like, well, how would I want it to look? What kind of a cover do I want? For those of you who may or may not be familiar with how traditional publishing works, you have 0 say in the cover. I mean, they might say, what are your ideas? But they really in general have their own ideas. And you lose some creative involvement. I don't know, you don't have that full creative
Some
voice.
creative control, because you have to listen to the marketing department say,
That's right. You have to
we
work with
don't think this is going to help sell your
we
book.
like those
Yeah.
colors, that hasn't really worked for us, that font's not great. So when you're doing it this way, you're like, this is what I feel, this is what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna have fun with this, right? So that's one thing. You self-publish it and then you get it out in the world, you share it however you want to share it. The second thing that you do is there are chapbook contests. So different small indie publishers, this is a submittable chill subs deal. So you're just going to do a little bit of research, chapbook contest.
So hang on real quick. Let me just define. So chill subs and submittable, if you're not already using them, they are both platforms where literary magazines accept submissions through submittable. Submittable, you can also look up different literary magazines, and chill subs is a place that profiles different places where you can submit your work. Small publishers, literary magazines, regular magazines. I believe, Sharla, is chill subs a subscription?
It's free for users, but it does charge the literary magazines, and so that's why sometimes there's a submission fee.
Okay. And I also want to recommend that you look up Erica Dreyfus, and that's Erica with a K, Dreifus, because she publishes a bi-monthly list of opportunities for writers. They're all paid, none of them charge to enter. And I see calls for chapbooks come in there very often. You might also want to subscribe to Becky Took's Lit Mag Confidential. Is it Lit Mag Confidential? Lit Mag something.
Lit Mag News.
Lit Mag News on Substack, because Becky also profiles different editors. She has conversations with different people, and it's a great place to see where you can submit your work, how you can submit your work. So Darien, how do we know that a particular publisher is a good fit for our work?
Well, like everything we do our research and our homework, and we look at their past titles, right? We look at their ethos, we look at their about, and we're like, okay, yeah, I'm on board with this. Like, this is how I feel about my work and words in the world. But look at their past titles, look at what they've put out before, and be like, and if you can, obviously support them by buying a title or 2, which is going to be helpful. Sharla put in the chat a discount for Black Lawrence Press, they have both chapbook contests as well as they sell chapbooks, and theirs are bound because they are a publisher and they keep them in perpetuity, and they also do PDFs. But of course, the nice thing about a chapbook, seeing the actual physical form, is you're like, oh, that's how I could do it, right? Or like, when you see all these different formats, you go, oh, that's another, I didn't think about that. I could do that too, right? There's different ways that you can kind of experience it. So, it helps to buy one so you can see one if you're not familiar with it before you launch into it and sort of give it a try. But
And that
that's,
also gives you an idea of what's the quality of work that they're putting out. Would you be
yes,
proud to be shelved
yes.
next to these books? Because, you know, it's a two-way street. We tend as writers, because there's so much competition, we tend to assume that we are supplicants begging for scraps. And in fact, we are not. We are professionals who are seeking a partnership where we and they can nurture each other, promote each other's work, make each other look good.
Yes, no, it's true. That's a really good point. You know, I mean, here's the thing about what I really like about using a chapbook as in sort of an entryway into seeing your words in the world is because you do have a little bit more of that creative control. You will have to relinquish it a little bit, well, or maybe even a lot if you go down the traditional publishing route. So just be aware of that. But it's also just great because you get to really engage with your work in a much deeper level than say I can sometimes with my novels. You know, I have 5 novels with Penguin Random House, and those are great experiences to have, but it's a completely different experience from putting together an 18 to 30 page chapbook, which is like work that's usually pretty tender to your heart. You know, somebody had asked about in the chat, let me see if I can find it.
It was Danielle. She's writing a series of short pieces around 1,100 words on her father's passing.
Yes.
She's wondering, is that too long for a chapbook? I mean, I would certainly say that's work that's close to her heart. She said it's short prose, about 1,100 words each story with different memories. Would it be better for a short collection or okay for a chapbook?
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the number. So so each piece is 1,100 words, and how many pieces total?
There's no.
She didn't say how many pieces total.
So it's gonna,
Um,
yeah, so 1,100 words is a little long because if you figure that in even like a regular sized chapbook like this or like this, we're still looking at about 250 words per page because it's going to be single space and a slightly smaller type. This is again just a general form. Chapbooks are going to be one of the most varied literary forms you will see out there. You know, it just like poetry collections, once they're published, look kind of the same. Chapbooks can be anything. So it does depend, but 1,100, that's really more like trending into like more essay territory. I mean, longer essay. I wouldn't call that a micro essay necessarily. So, but again, you can do whatever you want. So you could have just a small collection of these essays that fit together and they're interlinked and they speak to each other and they tell this story. And it doesn't have to be this huge long thing. I don't know that it would necessarily be a chapbook, but you could also look at the essays and be like, is there a way that I can work with the chapbook format that really amplifies the story that I'm trying to tell without taking anything away from it? So maybe if you might naturally have certain breaks or things like that, but you can also just do it. I mean, we've seen, like, as Sharla shared with True Story, those are, I think, were 6,000 words. Do you
Yeah,
remember?
there are just long short stories. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
but
yeah, and there was one called One Story magazine as well that was about
that's
that length.
yeah, it's still going on in one story, I believe.
okay,
She's
yeah, but again, those aren't necessarily chapbooks. They're just smaller format books, right? So you know, it's kind of a what's in a name sort of thing. So it depends on what you want to do with your work. So I would say you always create your work first. You always do your work first, and then you decide what's the best way for this to be in the world? Like, do I want this to be all together? Am I going to divide this into sections? Am I going to, like, when I wrote mine, I had a very specific constraint. I had at the time 250 words or less. That was just my own personal constraint for no other reason than I wanted a constraint. So so that it was easier for me to approach the project. I didn't know that it was going to be a chapbook. It actually was supposed to be a 110,000 word novel based on my matrilineal line. And when I started doing this almost as an exercise, it became this whole other thing. And you know how it is when your creativity tells you very clearly, you know, this is really what we might want to be looking at. You're kind of like pen in hands, but you're like, okay, fine. And that's what happened. So, you know, you just never know. And so what I like also about the chapbook process is that it is a little bit slower. You can do it quickly in terms of fast drafting, which is why I have the workshop coming up. And we know, Alice and I both know how awesome fast drafting can be in terms of helping you get out of your own way. But really what's great about the chapbook format is it is a slow approach to a small body of work that you really get to kind of immerse yourself in and really understand where you are with both your writing and how it might be out in the world. And that's a really valuable thing to have. And like I said, it's harder to do that with longer form pieces like a novel. Not impossible. I mean, but it's different. So it's kind of just a neat experience to have, I think, putting a chapbook together.
I love that. So how does it support the writing process? What do you think the process of making a chapbook does for us as writers?
Honestly, because you can create a chapbook pretty fast. I mean, if it's like somebody comes to me and says, I want to write a full length novel, I want to write a full length memoir. I'm like, all right, how much time do we have? What kind of, what's your writing skill? Where are you at? What do you have? I mean, it could be 3 months for somebody, 60 days. It could be 5 years. It could be 10 years. I mean, that's a big thing. A chapbook is really manageable. You can literally hold it in your hands in a way, metaphorically, but also physically. I mean, it's something that you can give yourself a challenge to do or create in a relatively short period of time and see what's possible. And I think for us as writers, especially because if you are a longer form writer, it's hard not to get sometimes either feedback or a sense of how your words are in the world, if they're in the world. And this is a way to find out. It's a way to find out. It's a way to express yourself. And I think it's good for us to have all these different angles with how we approach our writing, right? Like, I don't actually consider myself a novelist or a poet. I just consider myself a writer who writes novels and some poems and some essays. And I kind of look at it like that. So if you just look at this as, one more tool in your toolbox, one more way in which you're playing with form, and it's helping you become a better writer, because you can use this even if you're writing a novel. Two of my novels have these vignettes between chapters that are probably between 500, 900 words. And I didn't even realize I had done this. This was over 15 years ago that I had done those two novels. And you can just use this in so many ways when you learn sort of this art of telling a story in a small amount of space, but with intention.
That's great. I'm looking in the chat for any questions, and I have from Rebecca, what are the finances or costs of if you self-publish a chapbook? What are some things you have to consider if you're going to self-publish? Do you know, Darien?
Well, I see with Rebecca, she says a chapter book, which is different from a chapter.
She means chapbook. It's a typo.
Oh, okay. Because a chapter book is a real thing too. Just, that's like, we see that with middle grade. They're like literally small chapters
Yes. And
yeah.
Rebecca actually has a middle grade book coming out. Rebecca, is it Penguin Random House who's bringing out your book next year?
It's Macmillan, FSG, Macmillan, yeah.
Love FSG.
Awesome.
Congratulations. Yeah. So the chapbook is really going to be what kind of a print run are you going to have? Are you going to make it on the copier at home and just like have the cover done with a full color cover, but like on a cardstock? Are you going to do the hand stitching yourself? I've done hand stitching on projects myself. I love it, but it's not super efficient if you don't have a lot of time, which most of us don't. And of course, you're not going to do that for like 500 copies. You could, though. A lot of people do. You have an owl and a hammer. I mean, there's like this whole thing, right? So you could do that. So it could be honestly as cheap as 25 bucks, right? Or if you're going to go full on and you go through a publisher, it's just going to depend on, again, how big is it? What kind of a spine you're looking at, what kind of distribution you might be looking at. But I will say generally, Rebecca, we're talking fairly small. I mean, a lot of people will also, I don't want to say, I would say that some people use zines, like you'll see, if you come by the booth at AWP, if you're going to be there, they'll use zines as like a small marketing tool, or they'll use it as a way to like introduce people to their writing. Chapbooks can do that, but they are actually the writing. They are just a smaller version size-wise to a larger collection. So, but because it doesn't really go mainstream in terms of, like I said, being able to be sold that way, they're just harder to come across. So it's really going to come down to, why would you choose, for example, a chapbook over a larger collection? And my response to that is, it's a great way to see what kind of material you have and if you want to keep going with it. So yes, to whoever had asked the question before about can it keep growing? Yeah, it can keep growing from there. And if you self-published your chapbook and it's, let's say 20 pieces and you're like, I want to keep going because there's more here. And you do a collection that's 48 pieces and you want to take that out to a publisher, you would just disclose to them that you've already published this. And if it wasn't actually published in a lit journal, they may not care as much if they're like, well, you did 40 copies. We're not going to stress about that. What they don't want is if your work is readily available in the world and now we're trying to charge for it, they're like, that's going to just hurt sales. That's their impression. I don't
Yeah.
actually.
In the
But
chat, Brenda asks, what platform could an indie author use to self-publish a chapbook? And I pointed out you can do anything from making those copies at Kinko's to putting it on Ingram or BookBub, where it needs to be large enough to have a spine. There are also online self-publishing platforms that specialize in magazines. Amy Halloran also points out she's used local printers for printing and reprints. She worked with a designer to make it nice. And the cost for a 32-page pamphlet has been anywhere from $132 to $350, depending on the printer and the quantity. The lowest cost was for 800 copies. So I want to ask a question here, which is, how much of a designer do we need to be to pass out a chapbook and feel proud that it's going to represent our work?
I think that's like just, the great thing about us being writers is that we're just creative, period, right? It doesn't matter about whether or not we can quote unquote paint like a landscape, but you have a sense for what feels good for you, right? That's how we choose our book covers when we are walking around a bookstore or whatever. We're drawn to the cover and the colors first. So you're going to use that same aesthetic to make the decision about what feels good about this particular collection for you. And if you choose to write multiple chapbooks, which some of the writers I work with do, you can actually kind of have like a template. So like maybe the cover of everything is like a different color, like one might be green, one might be purple, one might be yellow, or it has a certain like geometric kind of, one has all triangles and one has all stars, but the layout of the title looks the same. So you kind of know that they go together. I mean, that's how you can play with it. Or you can just do whatever. You can make a collage. You can just do, I think the idea is that what feels good to you. And that's again why I love starting with a chapbook, because you just have, it's such a natural form of such a full expression, I guess, of the work on a lot of levels, because you're making the decision, this cover or this cover art speaks to what's inside. They support each other,
Yeah, and I would say you can also look at, if you want to, if that intimidates you, you can hire a designer. I mean, those people do book designs, and
Sure.
you might even find a graduate school a student who is interested in like designing a small book for you or something like that. And you can still have a say on what it looks like and the cover and all that as well. I know that I had to, I put it in the chat, I designed a book in graduate school and I used Adobe InDesign, and it was hard to figure out how to use it. I had to sit down with somebody and have them show me. It wasn't like obvious to me, but when I submitted my book to be published, I just had it, in a Word document, poem after poem, like you would anything that you submit, and then they created the book, so I didn't have to know that. So that's also an option as well.
And Amy says in the chat, she used an art student for design, 20 bucks an hour, and a friend offered to illustrate. So I also want to ask you this. So one of the reasons to self-publish a small book is to get our words into the world, to see what it feels like, to have them in that shape, to announce ourselves as a writer. And in a way, a chapbook also becomes a calling card that kind of announces your work to the world. But if you want to charge for your chapbook, number one, how much should you charge for it? And number two, how do you actually sell it? So when I was going to the Hippocamp Creative Nonfiction Conference, I wrote a book called Get Published in Literary Magazines. Please don't buy it. It's way out of date, and I need to write an updated version. But at the time, I sold it for 10 bucks at the bookstore table, and it was a great way to help fund my plane ticket to get to the conference. Because when I first started speaking there, I was not a big enough deal to have them pay for my plane ticket or my hotel or anything like that. But not everybody has my background as a professional street performer who looked at hundreds of thousands of people around the world and said, "Did you like my show? It's time to give me money." Mm-hmm. So for those of us who have not been street performers or exotic dancers, how do we feel confident about hand selling this book?
All right, so I will tell you, and I'm sure I'm not alone, since writers tend to be introverts, and the last thing we want to do is hawk our wares and be like, "Did you read my book? Would you like to read my book? Would you blurb my book? Would you consider?" That's like the most, we're all like, "Oh, right, like, can the publisher just take care of that?" And what we're seeing in the past 10 years for sure is like, no, we have to be partners in our own success in terms of getting our words out. But what I would do is kind of pivot that thought a little bit and be like, you know what? No one's going to be a better champion of your work than you, period. Even if an editor loves it, an agent loves it, your mom loves it, that's great. But it's your creation. And so you want to champion that work. So again, the price is going to depend on what are they getting for it. Are they getting a 40-page chapbook, or are they getting like a 5-page chapbook, right? I would say anywhere from $3, which means that's probably a Kinko's Run publication, but $3 honestly to about 10. The minute chapbooks start to go over that $10 pricing, people get a little hedged because there's just not a lot there content-wise. Now, if it was all letterpress, so I've paid, I think 15 for one that was, but it was all letterpress, like every single page was letterpress and the cover was letterpress. So I'm also buying an art form there. So I would say it's, if anyone is here is thinking that they might make money from their chapbook, I will be the horrible person that says that's probably not going to happen. But it might help you down the road in terms of the bigger projects. And again, it's the experience, right? It's being able to say, oh, I have 2 chapbooks, you know, and it's about, you know, the loss of my father. It's also, it's about, you know, you can talk about that and you can also bring that into your current project. There's just also so many fun ways that you can play with organizing a chapbook that it's just, this is your chance to just really see what's possible. And so that's kind of what I love. But yeah, I mean, the pricing is not going to be great. And then you're going to have to ship it to someone that you may or may not charge for the shipping. I mean, you're probably going to lose money in general when you self-publish in general. I say this as someone who is self-published as well. It's tricky because, so you have to have sort of that bigger, I don't want to say strategic because that sounds so, you know, but you do have to have that bigger view of what your writing is going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how you told me, Darien, recently that you never know what's going to happen. Just get that work done. You never know what as soon as it's completed and you send it out, you don't know what steps that's going to lead you to.
100%.
And it did encourage me. I have been finishing my short story collection, so thank you, Darien.
So
You were the kick in my pants that I needed. We do have a question about your 6-week course. Do you have a moment to talk about how you tackle the chapbook in 6 weeks?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's going to be a good example for us, even if we're not taking a course, to get a sense of what the structure is like. And if you feel like you're ready to dive into building a chapbook, here's some steps to take, and you have the opportunity to do it with Darien by your side. How's it going to go?
Well, so the idea with this class in particular is let's just do it and let's do it quick. And the reason why is because I want to help you get out of your own way. You know, I mean, I don't know, any writers here get in their own way? I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, it is, as Charlotte was saying, we have so many good ideas in our head about what it is that we want to write, but until we get it on the page, we pin those words onto the page, we really don't know what we have because we're almost always surprised by what shows up. And that's why the goal here is to get the writing done. So it's sort of 2 parts, maybe 3 parts. One is getting some writing done. I know some people might have ideas already about what they want to do, or they have existing pieces. I usually encourage people in a class like this because it is generative, but also we want to go with whatever the energy is right now. And so sometimes putting the past project on pause for a second and writing to that project, but with the prompts. So creating new work. So you're going to be writing. So that's the most important thing. At the end of 6 weeks, you're going to have some writing done for sure. Lots of these small pieces. The second thing is to teach you how to use structure. When you look at a manuscript and you realize that you're writing for a manuscript, you've got a table of contents, you've got front and back matter, you understand how a chapbook is put together, it starts to feel real. You start to feel like you're not just writing into the void or doing some journaling or just writing to a prompt for your own sort of like writing exercise. You're like, wait, this is very purposeful and intentional. So adding that structure is going to give you a real sense for, oh my God, this like could be a real legit thing, right? And the third thing is, and it's really just getting it done. So at the end of 6 weeks, I mean, we're not even writing for the full 6 weeks because the last week or two, we're really doing some workshopping. We're looking at where do we go from here, talking about in more depth, so, you know, creation and submission possibilities. And of course, you know, it's the idea is not that it's going to be fully polished in 6 weeks. Some of you will be. It depends on how much time you have. I'm trying to make it really feasible for our schedules and our lives, but you will have a solid draft. You will have something that now, when you have a draft, my friends, you now have options. When you don't have a draft, you don't have options. So the goal here is to give you options, and you can be like, I want more, I want less. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do nothing but chapbooks from now on. I mean, who knows? We won't know until we find out. And so that's what this is. So, and of course, since it's a live Zoom, the idea is that you've got myself and you've got other people in the cohort who are going to kind of I don't like the word accountable, but let's just be honest. It really helps when you're not doing this alone sometimes. And it helps when I'm like, okay, this is due by next Tuesday. And people are like, oh my
I
God,
gotta say, Darien, that accountability is so incredibly valuable. I have been creeping along on a novel that I'm working on, and the only reason I'm getting any work done at all is that I have agreed to meet a friend a couple of times a week at a specific time, and I don't want to disappoint her. So I will actually show up on a day where I'm like, I never would have made time to write if I hadn't had that appointment. And that's what I love about classes. So if you're going to put together a chapbook, even if you're not able to take Darien's class, which is going to be an awesome class, and it's a great opportunity to get a lot of work done in a short time, it may help you put your chapbook together if you find some other people who want to do that with you, just so you have somebody else to show up for. Darien, is there anything really extra special we should know? What else?
You know what? One thing that I really feel like, and this is kind of the ancillary real bonus to doing something like this, and it feels kind of soft, but I actually feel like it's one of the most important things. It is about the work, but it's not just about the work. What this is really about is you really learning to trust yourself as a writer. And we get to do it sort of in this small arena, this small stage, right? In which you're like, so how does that work? Right. And so that's the other thing I really try to do is really help you remember not just who you are as a writer and not just like, okay, we're all writers, but really it's like you have a certain creative wisdom and it's really important that you start leaning on that some more. And the chapbook is a really great way to start playing in that space again. Because like I said, larger projects can get a little bit unwieldy, but this is a great way to be like, okay, you can use it as honestly a recentering tool. And you'll get a manuscript at the end of, by the end of May or whatever it is. It starts in April, so end of May. So you'll have a manuscript, but it's really so that you have your own clarity about what's possible for you. And you go, oh, that's right. I forgot. This is really who I am. And this is what I want to write about because this kind of small attention to the chapbook opens up everything else.
I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. I
There's
know
so
that we
many,
have.
sorry, Allison.
Sorry, go ahead, Sharla.
I was just gonna say I love all these chat books that people are popping into the chat, like all the experiences people have with chat books. That's pretty great. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely love it. And we will go ahead and we will put the links to all of those chat books in our YouTube caption. We'll also be listing the classes and the resources that we've recommended in that YouTube caption as well. So if you've got a chat book, please drop it into the chat. We would love to share that with our audience as well. So
Yes.
in just a minute, we are going to give you our top tips for what you can do today to move your writing forward, whether that is towards a chapbook or something else. But I wanted to say, please join us at Craft Talks. I'll be teaching tomorrow a 2-hour webinar that includes writing time and live editing called Flash Draft Your Book. We're going to look at 5 key scenes and how you can structure your book. Darien's got that amazing 6-week chapbook class coming up. We've posted the link in the chat. Please do feel free to forward the replay to a writer friend. If you are watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. I'm supposed to be like pointing to something, right? When I'm doing like the subscribe thing.
Comment below.
Hello, fellow kids. And do join us next episode. It's going to be April 29th. So it's a ways off. Sharla and I and Darien will all be at the AWP conference in Los Angeles the last week of March. So if you're in AWP, please stop by and see us. Darien and I will both be doing live editing at the Writer-ish/Woodhall Publishing table in the book fair. So do drop by and say hello. And join us next episode, April 29th. It's going to be a surprise to all of us. We haven't picked out who our guest is going to be yet. So let us know if there's anything specific you'd love to hear about that, or I'll just have to give you a house tour of my new home in Portugal because I will be moving between now and then. And we might even have a roof so that we are no longer actively getting rained on, which I am super excited about. So what are our top tips today? Sharla, what's your top tip for us moving forward?
I was thinking about this and I would suggest going to a library or a bookstore and asking if they have chat books, just so you can like get a feel up for them. Or if you're at AWP, see if you can check out a table that might be tabling chat books, just because they have so many different variety of sizes and they have different potentials. So they're really kind of an art form. If you haven't seen them before, I think that might be a great way just kind of get started with the idea.
I
Maybe it
love
will be
it.
good, maybe not. we'll see.
Darien, what is your top tip?
I have only one, Allison. Okay, well, there's a handout that Allison and Sharla sent out that you all have with a couple of ideas and exercises that you can kind of distill from this. And it's about themes. And I know that you can, off the top of your head, you might be like, I know what the themes are for my work. But I would encourage you to look through that list and really just highlight anyone that is giving you a ping, even if you don't know why. Because again, this is about tapping into that creative wisdom. So I would just say, go through that exercise. That's my top tip, is to use that worksheet. Just give it like maybe 15 minutes, because I have a 10-minute writing prompt in there for you to try. And then just see how you feel with all of that. Or again, trying to establish that creative wisdom for yourself. Again, remembering what it is that you're writing about right now and whatever wants your attention. So it's kind of a weird tip, but do the worksheet, I guess, is my tip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And the PDF handout, it's in the email you got today that says Writer's Bridge in 1 hour. There's a button to click to get the PDF. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe. It's also in a link here in the YouTube caption, and you'll be able to get it. We've got some great suggestions coming in the chat. I also want to leave you with my top tip, which is, we mentioned earlier about making your own chapbooks and, high school kids creating zines in their bedrooms. Embrace your inner high school kid, the person who believed their work was worthy, who believed their work needed to be out there in the world, and print out your work on some pages, staple them together. Cut out some magazine pictures and put them in there just to get a sense of what it feels like when your work is in a tangible form, when it's in a shape that you feel like, oh, hey, I could do something with this. I could revise it. I could polish it. I could publish it. I could share it. Because in the end, that's what we're all about. We're here to connect with other people, to tell the stories that other people need to hear, and to tell our stories ourselves. Thank you all so much for being here today at the Writer's Bridge. You guys are amazing, and we'll see you again April 29th.
Thank you, everybody.
Please feel free to unmute yourselves for a joyful goodbye.
Thank you again. Goodbye.
Thank you
so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much. That
Always
was
great.
wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. It was excellent. Thank you so, so much.
Kirsten!
Thank you, everybody. That's great.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank you all for being here. Dan, great to see you.
You too, Allison.
Fantastic.
Darien, can I ask you a question? Allison